I thought I was living a fairy tale until my perfect boyfriend framed me for an organized scheme that left me facing an enormous term. Within 72 hours, my dream life shattered into a nightmare of illegal weapons, forbidden substances, and a desperate escape from the Internal Security Service. They say the higher you fly, the harder you fall. I never truly understood that until I reached the absolute peak of human happiness, only to be shoved off the edge into a bottomless pit of terror. For 72 hours, I lived a life that most people only see in movies. I was the protagonist of a fairy tale, swept off my feet by a man who seemed to be the physical embodiment of every dream I'd ever had. But by the end of those 3 days, that fairy tale didn't just end. It shattered into a million jagged pieces, and I was left bleeding out on the floor. It started on a Tuesday. I'm a high school teacher, a woman used to the mundane rhythm of grading papers and drinking lukewarm coffee. My boyfriend, Mark, had always been a bit of a mystery. He worked in international logistics, which meant he traveled a lot and had a level of wealth that never quite sat right with his humble demeanor. That Tuesday, he didn't just come home. He arrived in a chauffeured car, walked into our modest apartment, and told me to pack a bag. 3 days, Elena, he said, his eyes glowing with an intensity I'd never seen. I've finished my final project. No more travel, no more secrets, just us. Day 1 was pure magic. He whisked me away to a private villa overlooking the Amalfi Coast. I remember the smell of lemons and salt air, the way the sunset turned the Mediterranean into a pool of liquid gold. That night, on a terrace lit by 100 candles, Mark knelt down. He didn't just give me a ring. He gave me a promise of a life I didn't think existed. We drank vintage champagne and talked about children, about a house in the countryside, about growing old together. I went to sleep that night feeling like the luckiest woman on the planet. I was so blinded by the glow of that diamond that I didn't notice the way Mark's hand shook when he checked his phone under the table. Day 2 was the height of luxury. We spent the morning on a private yacht, the kind of vessel that cost more than my entire hometown. We swam in hidden coves and ate lunch prepared by a personal chef. But the atmosphere started to shift in the afternoon. A sleek black speedboat approached us, and 2 men in expensive suits hopped aboard. Mark told me to stay in the cabin. I watched through the porthole as they spoke with hushed, urgent tones. One of them handed Mark a heavy metallic briefcase. When Mark returned to the cabin, his smile didn't reach his eyes. He told me it was just final paperwork for his retirement. I chose to believe him. I wanted to believe him so badly. That evening, we went to a high-stakes gala at a nearby estate. Everyone treated Mark like royalty, but there was an edge to their respect, a kind of guarded fear. I saw a man in the corner watching us, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, and every time our eyes met, he looked at me with something that felt like pity. Day 3 began with a chilling silence. I woke up to find the villa empty. No staff, no Mark. The sun was high, but the air felt cold. I wandered into the living room and found a note on the glass table. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll be back by sunset and then we leave forever. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I tried to call him, but his phone was disconnected. I spent hours pacing the marble floors, the luxury of the villa now feeling like a gilded cage. Around 4 p.m., I heard a heavy thud from the basement. Driven by a mix of fear and desperation, I went downstairs. The door to Mark's office was slightly ajar. I'd never been allowed inside. When I pushed it open, the scent of oil and something metallic hit me. In the center of the room sat the metallic briefcase from the yacht. It was open. Inside were no papers. There were several stacks of high-density plastic packets containing a dense gray substance, the kind of banned substances that carry a heavy sentence. Beside them lay several pieces of illegal weaponry, the heavy, dark metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. My breath hitched. My logistics boyfriend wasn't retiring. He was involved in an organized scheme that went far deeper than I could imagine. As I turned to run, the front door upstairs was kicked in with a violence that shook the entire house. I heard heavy boots thumping on the floorboards above. Then a voice boomed, cold and clinical, echoing through the vents. "Internal Investigation Unit, nobody move. We know you're in here, Elena. Your partner has already been detained." I froze, my hand on the cold basement wall, realizing with a jolt of pure horror that the man I loved hadn't just lied to me. He had set me up to be the face of a massive criminal operation. Just as I moved toward the small basement window to escape, I heard the basement door at the top of the stairs creak open and a shadow fell across the floor. It wasn't the authorities. It was the man with the scar from the gala, and he wasn't holding a badge. He was holding a silenced weapon, and his eyes were void of any mercy. The man with the scar didn't move. He stood there, the silenced weapon pointed not at my head, but at the door behind him. He pressed a finger to his lips, his eyes darting toward the ceiling where the heavy footsteps of the Internal Investigation Unit were vibrating the floorboards. "If you want to live past the next 5 minutes," he whispered, his voice like gravel grinding together, "you will do exactly what I say. Those men upstairs aren't here to read you your rights. They're here to make sure there are no witnesses to the organized scheme Mark left behind." My mind was a whirlwind of panic. "Who are you?" I breathed, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. "Where is Mark?" The man gave a grim, joyless smile. "Mark is exactly where he needs to be. Now move." He grabbed my arm with a grip like a vice and pulled me toward a section of the basement wall that looked like solid stone. He pushed a hidden release, and a narrow wooden panel slid back, revealing a dark, damp crawl space. I had no choice. Behind us, I heard the basement door explode off its hinges. Shouts of "Clear" and "Search the perimeter" echoed down the stairs. We scrambled into the darkness just as the first flashlight beams cut through the gloom of the office. We crawled through the dirt for what felt like miles, the sound of my own frantic breathing filling the narrow tunnel. Finally, we emerged into a disused drainage pipe that led out to a rocky cliffside, hidden from the villa's main view. A black SUV was idling on a dirt path 100 yards away. "Get in," the man commanded. As we sped away from the only life I knew, I watched the villa shrink in the rearview mirror. Blue and red lights were swarming the property. "They think I did it," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The packets of substance, the illegal weapons. They're going to say I was the one running the network. "That was the plan from the start, Elena," the man said, keeping his eyes on the winding coastal road. "Mark didn't choose you because he loved you. He chose you because you're a high school teacher with a clean record and no family to ask questions. You were the perfect ghost. He's been funneling the proceeds of his organized scheme through accounts in your name for 3 years. I felt sick. Every vacation, every gift, every moment of happiness was just a layer of a trap being built around me. "Why are you helping me then?" I asked, looking at the scar on his face. "I'm not helping you," he said coldly. "I'm protecting my investment. Mark owes my group a lot of money, and you're the only collateral left." He took a sharp turn into a hidden industrial park and pulled into a windowless warehouse. Inside, a small television was perched on a stack of crates, tuned to a local news channel. My heart stopped. My face was on the screen. The headline didn't say, "Missing Woman" or "Teacher Kidnapped." It said, "Primary Suspect Identified in Major Criminal Network." The news anchor was talking about a heavy accusation involving a plot to destabilize the region's security. They were painting me as a mastermind, a woman who had used her position as a teacher to recruit radicals for an organized scheme. "I have to call someone," I sobbed, reaching for my pocket, but the man snatched my phone and crushed it under his boot. "Nobody is coming for you, Elena. To the world, you're a criminal facing dozens of years in prison. To Mark, you're a loose end." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table toward me. "Look." It was a live feed from a high-end hotel room in a country I didn't recognize. There was Mark. He wasn't handcuffed. He wasn't in distress. He was sitting on a plush velvet sofa, sipping a drink and laughing with a man in a dark suit. Mark leaned forward and handed the man a small, familiar object, the velvet box that had held my engagement ring. "The diamond is a high-capacity encrypted drive," the man with the scar explained. "It contains the keys to their entire financial network. Mark sold the drive and he sold you, but there's one thing he forgot." The man reached out and grabbed my hand, staring intensely at the diamond ring still sparkling on my finger. "He gave you the fake. He kept the drive. But the tracker is in the one you're wearing." Just as he said it, the heavy metal doors of the warehouse began to groan, the sound of a hydraulic ram slamming against the steel. A voice on a megaphone outside screamed, "This is the internal security unit. We have the location of the suspect. Prepare to breach." The man with the scar turned to me, a look of genuine fear finally crossing his face. "They're not here for the ring, Elena. They're here because Mark just activated the cleanup protocol on your tracker." He looked at the ring, then back at me. "If we don't get that ring off your finger in the next 10 seconds, this entire building is going to become our tomb." I pulled at the ring, but my finger had swollen from the heat and stress. It wouldn't budge. The ring wasn't just a tracker. I could see a tiny, rhythmic red light beginning to pulse from deep inside the stone. The man with the scar didn't waste a second. He grabbed a bottle of industrial lubricant from a nearby workbench and doused my hand. "Pull!" he hissed. I yanked with every ounce of strength I had left, the metal biting into my skin, until finally the ring slid off, leaving a raw, red welt behind. He didn't even look at it. He snatched the ring and sprinted toward a heavy metal disposal bin at the far end of the warehouse. He threw it inside and slammed the lid just as the warehouse's skylights shattered. Flash grenades detonated with a deafening roar, filling the room with blinding white light and a high-pitched ringing that felt like a needle in my brain. Through the haze, I saw dark figures rappelling from the ceiling. These weren't the internal security investigators I had hoped for. They wore no insignia, no badges, only tactical gear and masks. They weren't here to arrest me. They were here to finish the cleanup Mark had started. A muffled thud echoed from the metal bin. The engagement ring had detonated. It wasn't a massive explosion, but it was a specialized incendiary charge designed to incinerate anything within a 3-foot radius. If I had been wearing it, I would have been unrecognizable. "The back exit! Now!" the scarred man yelled, grabbing my shoulder and shoving me toward a service tunnel. We scrambled through the narrow passage just as the first rounds of illegal weapons fire tore through the crates where we had been standing. We emerged into a rain-slicked alleyway, the cold air stinging my face. A nondescript sedan was waiting, its engine humming. "Who are you, really?" I demanded as we peeled away from the industrial park, the sound of sirens finally approaching in the distance. The man gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "My name is Victor. I was the lead investigator for the internal security check that originally targeted Mark's group. He didn't just ruin my career. He had his organized scheme frame me for the very crimes I was investigating. I've been tracking him for 2 years, waiting for him to make a mistake. You were that mistake, Elena." I sat back in the seat, my mind racing. How? I'm just a teacher. "Exactly," Victor said, his voice softening slightly. "Mark thought you were a nobody. But he didn't count on one thing. You know his patterns. You spent every day with him for 3 years. You saw the people he met, the places he went, and most importantly, you saw the codes he used." I looked down at my shaking hands. My mind flashed back to the villa, the yacht, the long nights Mark spent on his laptop. I remembered the way he always tapped a specific rhythm on his desk when he was stressed. It wasn't a nervous habit, it was a sequence. "I know where the secondary server is," I whispered. He used my school's network. He told me he was using the high-speed connection for logistics, but he was actually piggybacking off the school's encrypted academic server to mask his communications. He thought no one would ever look for a criminal network inside a public high school. Victor's eyes widened. "If we can get into that server, we can prove the heavy accusation against you is a fabrication. We can link the illegal weapons and the packets of substance directly to his offshore accounts." The next few hours were a blur of adrenaline and high-stakes hacking. We broke into the school under the cover of darkness. My heart ached as I walked past my own classroom, a place that felt like a lifetime ago. Using my faculty credentials, we accessed the main frame. It took Victor 30 minutes to bypass Mark's secondary encryption, but once he was in, the truth poured out like a flood. There were logs of every transaction, every shipment of prohibited substances, and every order for the organized scheme. But the smoking gun was a series of encrypted emails Mark had sent just 48 hours ago. He had detailed exactly how he was going to frame the asset, me, to take the fall for the group's entire operation, allowing him to retire with his new identity and the diamond drive. "We have it," Victor said, his voice triumphant. "The internal security unit is already monitoring this data dump. The real investigators, the ones Mark couldn't bribe, are on their way to his hotel right now." The nightmare didn't end instantly, but the tide had turned. 2 weeks later, the heavy accusations against me were formally dropped. The news cycle that had branded me a criminal mastermind was now filled with reports of the largest crackdown on an organized scheme in the region's history. Mark was apprehended at an airport in a non-extradition country, caught with the drive that contained enough evidence to put him away for a huge term. Decades of his life spent behind bars. I stood on the balcony of a small, quiet apartment in a city where no one knew my name. My life as a teacher was over, and the 3 happiest days of my life had left scars that would never truly heal. I looked down at my hand, where the red mark from the ring was finally fading. I had flown high, and I had fallen hard. But as I watched the sunrise over a new horizon, I realized that I wasn't the victim Mark had intended me to be. I was the one who had brought his empire down, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just happy. I was free.